What I would say is you were created perfect. You're amazing. You're brilliant already. Not because you got a degree, not because you got to learn something outside of yourself or receive something outside of yourself, but because of who you are.
UnLost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Today's guest is David Heppard, a credible messenger and a fierce advocate for justice and healing. He's the co-founder and director of Vision and Values at the Black Rose Collective, a community-driven organization working to dismantle systemic oppression with love, care, and collective power. David's journey began with a life sentence at 16 years old. He spent 24 years behind bars before being released due to a landmark juvenile justice reform system inspired by advances in youth brain science. Since coming home, David has been deeply involved in community work, supporting others impacted by incarceration, building meaningful partnerships, and showing up where he's needed most. From the confines of a prison cell to leading initiatives that foster empathy, compassion, and systemic change, this is a story of resilience, redemption, and relentless dedication. David, welcome to UnLost Cause.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that.
Wow, there's so much to cover, so I'm going to just jump in. When you were growing up as a child, did you ever think of starting something on your own, like what you're doing now, like a business, a nonprofit, a movement, or anything like that?
Not really. Well, let me say this. I remember when I was young, I think I was 7, and I went around the neighborhood. We were cleaning yards. And I remember we was doing it for quarters. I had a video game addiction when I was a little kid. But I think that gave me a glimpse of the camaraderie of folks working together for a shared cause. And so that was a glimpse. I mean, I was young and I was motivated by the opportunity to play video games. And, I got to hang out with some of my friends in the community. So that was it. But beyond that, though, I didn't, though, right? I really didn't. I think I've always had a foot soldier mentality, right? I mean, when you look at my history, the only time that I've ever really had any leadership positions is when it was like pushed, like, you know what I mean? Like I get nominated. That wasn't stuff that I really signed up for. And I think that my esteem and self-image was so battered and bruised when I was young. If I'm honest, I didn't believe I was able to do anything. So I would have to get pushed, or I would have to be somebody's idea to push me forward in that regard. So that's the reality of, when I was young. I didn't envision this, not when I was little. Absolutely. I was in survival mode when I was little. And so in survival mode, it's hard to see past your immediate needs.
So David, would you characterize, you just used the word survival mode, and when talking about your childhood, is that how you would characterize your upbringing, or what was the upbringing like?
I mean, it was tough. I think that you get exposed to a lot of violence, and it was difficult, right? It was difficult. I think it was a lot of disconnection. It was a lot of, my parents came from a lot of trauma. And so I try to always stay connected to their humanity. And they did the best that they could in raising me and my brother. And so I think that they did the best that they could to be able to show up for me and my brother. But I think it was difficult. I think it was difficult because the world that we're navigating, I think it was difficult dealing with school systems that had this inability to see our humanity and understand what trauma looked like when it showed up at school. All they cared about is if you were raising your hand and if you were following the rules, and they had this expectation of how you should show up to school, but they didn't really, it wasn't trauma informed. It wasn't culturally responsive in how they dealt with us. So I thought it was difficult as a young child. As I got a little bit older, I think different elements got interjected. I had a lot of friends die in my teens.
And so when you say you got a little bit older, about what age? You said in your teens, so that's just like 13, 14?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. And so I think it was the early 90s. And power group dynamics changed in our communities. And when I say power groups, I refer to what some folks conventionally refer to as gangs. We kind of reject the premise, like the framing. The framing is so loaded. When you say somebody's a gang member, you somehow strip them of their humanity, and so sometimes you're not looking at a child, a 12-year-old. Like in your mind, when that word gets said, they become this caricature of themselves, this idea, this false image of a person that's detached from humanity. And so I think so that's why we understand that a lot of youth in our community, they lean into what we call power groups because this is how they access power, right? And it's a strategy to stay connected to the humanity as we deal with a lot of these complex issues in our community.
And then, David, opposite of these power groups and gangs, like, did you have any role models that taught you about leadership, entrepreneurship, or community impact? It could be a church, a father figure, an uncle, a friend. What about the flip side of that?
Well, I think coincidentally, I call my favorite uncle, right? My dad's younger brother, and he's my namesake. I was named after him, right? And so I've always looked up to him. And when I was really, really little, I think he stayed with us briefly. But the problem was, he got incarcerated when I was really young too. And he had 20 something years that he had to do. So majority of my young life, he was incarcerated. And so we visited him a few times, but I've always looked up to him. And I mean, even when I was acting up, I remember my dad took me inside to visit him. And he was like, man, listen, man, you gotta listen to your dad. And it was like, so he was something I looked up to. But I think that there was this other dynamic of, especially when I was starting to come of age, the people that I looked up to probably weren't getting it the right way, right? And so that's why I always say it's about accessibility. I remember you look to who is, in your perspective, doing well. In my neighborhood, that was folks who were maybe selling dope or whatnot. And I remember I was young and I asked, like, listen, I'm trying to get on. Like, I want to, I want what you have. You know what I mean? Like, I want to, and I remember, and then he told me though, and he was like, I remember he told me, but I think in that moment, he could have told me anything.
And he being your uncle, or?
No, this was an individual that was in the community that was doing well for himself.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right. And so he could have told me about the stock market, and I probably would have dived into that. It wouldn't have mattered. It wasn't a complicated process. You see somebody who has the things that you aspire to have and believe that his circumstance is better. Right. And you reach out and you ask, and that's the feedback that I received when I was young. But so it's always about accessibility. They always say that you can do anything that you put your mind to. And I believe that is true. But when you're in a box, and when I say box, it feels physically and it's mental, right? When you're in a box, it's hard to see outside what's in front of you. And so your imagination won't take you to a place that you can't see or touch or feel. And so when that happens, you gravitate to what's accessible.
So, Dave, let's talk about, you shared that you were sentenced to life in prison at 16. So what were if you can share with the community, what were the circumstances that happened, and, your emotions and how you were processing that as well?
I think so I was young, I was 16, and my girlfriend at the time, and she's my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time lived in the outskirts. I lived in Tacoma. She lived in Puyallup. And I was supposed to go see her, and I didn't have no ride. And I remember I called a friend of mine. He was an older gentleman. Like, I'm 16, but he's 21. And so he's mobile. And I asked him for a ride. He was like, yeah. But we gonna kick it first, right? And, it is what it is. I'm like, I need the ride. But so he picks me up, and he picks up some other kids from the neighborhood. And we end up doing some robberies. And one of those robberies went to a whole nother place. And it was hard. It's difficult when you cause harm And I know in my little brain at the time, like, and not just me, the other kids as well, though. I think we were all scared. We didn't want to be there. All these things. But the reality is, we were there. And we are accountable. And so I think it's difficult. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I think so. Anyway, we caused real harm.
Okay.
And and we don't even end up going. Like he just dropped us all home afterwards. And it was just, and then he got arrested, pulled over, arrested. And then he circled back and he took the police to all our houses and it got us all up. And then I just remember, I was in the bed sleep and the police busting in the house and then dragging me out and heard my mom crying and it was heavy. Right. And so I think for me, I think when you're young and you get a certain type of messaging your whole life, that's really connected to your self-worth. That you ain't nothing, that you ain't gonna amount to nothing, and all this stuff. That is the message that you get. You get from teachers, you get from adults, you get from all around you, and you get this consistent messaging. And then imagine, when you're black and brown and navigating through the society, you get inundated with that messaging through our media, through everything, right? And I think what was hard and devastating at the time, I think when you get that type of messaging your whole life, and then you do something that in your mind at the time validates that, right? You believe that. You're like, maybe I ain't shit, right? Like maybe they were always right, right? And so what semblance of a self-image or that you might have had when I was navigating and growing up gets demolished in that moment, right? And so I think emotionally it was, it was devastating. I think, but I think that like sometimes they do this a lot too. And if you see like kids getting a lot of time or stuff like that, or get faced with severe consequences after they cause great harm, they create these narratives. So they put the camera in the courtroom and they watch you and they see like, oh, he's not responding or he doesn't have any emotions or something like that. And they create these stories about who you are. And what they don't realize is you're a child. All right. And freeze is real. Like when you're confronted with, you get overloaded, you freeze and everything slows down. And you've been conditioned that to cry or anything is weakness and all this other stuff. All these things you get socialized with. And it all culminates into that moment where you look emotionless, but the fact of the matter is your emotions are going crazy. You don't understand. I didn't understand everything was happening fast. I just remember asking my lawyer because the way that they do time in juvenile is weeks. So, 5 weeks, 20 weeks. The way they do it in the adult system is months. So 200 months, 60 months, this ran consecutive and all this other stuff, right? So they're naming all these numbers. And so I remember asking my lawyer, like, how much time is that? Right. And he wrote 60 on a piece of paper and slid it to me. And I was like, years? Right. Like I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend at the time. And I knew afterwards, if you would have just watched me 5 minutes later when they took me back to the cell, man, I was a child again. I'm super emotional. And so emotionally, that really, like if I was on survival mode before that, I really got on survival mode after, now I'm in the penitentiary. And at that time in the early 90s, they didn't have any youth offender programs or YOP as they called it back then. And which means if you were young, there was only two choices. Either you stayed in the hole or you go to general population and you have to sign a waiver saying that Department of Corrections isn't liable if anything happens to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that's what happened.
And most people sign the waiver, is that right? Or do they stay in the hole?
I think some kids stayed in the hole, but many others don't, right? Because the hole is torture. And so all I knew was I wanted to get up out that hole. And I remember I was just telling my mom, like, I need to, man, you got to get me about this hole. Like they got me in there. You know what I mean? 23 hours a day, and folks are banging on they doors all night. And like, it's nuts in there, right? I remember when they gave me the opportunity to sign the waiver and they finally let me out, and I was happy. I remember I called home and told my mom, I'm like, man, they let me out. And then that's when I realized, like, she was terrified. Like, and she was just like, oh, stay by the police. Don't do this. I'm like, what? And that's when I realized, like, she was placating me. Like, she was like, I'm saying that I wanted to get out of the hole. And she was like, I understand. But she really didn't want me out of the hole. I think she believed she felt safer because I was in there. And so the idea of me being around everybody else terrified her. And so I remember that moment. And it kind of reinforces, like, for me, like I was, what we take our moms through sometimes, right? Like, I think when you're a kid, it's hard to think outside of yourself and your trauma and what you're dealing with and what's in front of you. But I never really connected to how hard it was for her specifically, right? She used to talk about how she used to always fear about getting that call, when I'm not home, right? And I couldn't conceptualize like what that was, how that was for her at the time. And I couldn't really conceptualize that. And so just the state of fear and the anxiousness that must create every time the phone ring and I'm not there. And so me being incarcerated and in that moment kind of brought it full circle for me, where it was like, man, I'm doing it again, right? Like, she's still terrified. She's still scared for me. And it was like, yeah. So that was difficult.
So you're 16, so you're not an adult, but you're in the general population with adults, and you're there for over 20 years, right? It's almost unimaginable how long 2 decades plus can be to most people. But I know that you have a lot of self-awareness and you have a lot of time to think and process. And in 20 plus years, people change so much, right? Especially at a young age. They evolve emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, in all different facets. So I'd love for you to share with the listeners, how were some of the major kind of realizations or changes you had those 20 years behind bars?
Let me say this, though, real quickly.
Sure.
When I first went to receiving, and after you get your time and all that other stuff, you go to receiving. I didn't call anybody. I kind of cut everybody
Can you just define what is receiving?
When you first go to the penitentiary, right? When you go to the system, they send you to a receiving unit, and they have a it's Shelton, Washington. And everybody goes there to get processed before you get classified, and then you get sent to whatever your parent institution is, right? And so I went there initially, and I wasn't reaching out to anybody. Like, I wasn't calling my family. I wasn't calling anybody. And it was, really, I was in my shame. I was in my, I was in my trauma. I was just like, I felt like all of that negative messaging I got was true. And so maybe what that judge said was real. Maybe the world is a better place without me in it, right? I really believed it. When that judge told me that, it tattooed into my soul. You know what I mean? And because of my lived experiences, I believed him, right? And because I caused great harm too. Like, listen, there's evidence. Like, there's proof that maybe you ain't shit, right? And I think for me, I was on that, right? And so I cut everybody off. I just went dark. I wasn't reaching out just because I was just, I know they got their lives to live, and I was in my shame spiral. And so when I was there, I remember that the officers came to my door and took me out the cell and took me to the counselor's office. And I remember they brought me in there, and I remember my counselor was like, "Why aren't you calling home?" And I'm like, at first I'm like, "How do you know I ain't calling home?" Right? Yeah, like, that's crazy. And they just put me on the phone with my family. And I remember it was my dad. And at first he was mad. At first he was not mad. He was concerned. He was like, "Are you okay? Like, what's going on?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm good." And then he was like, "Why aren't you calling?" And I was just like, "Man, I know y'all got y'all lives." And so now he got mad. That's our dynamic. He got mad. And he was just, because at first now he wanted to make sure I'm okay. And then once he realized I was okay now, and he was like, "Man, you gonna call at least once a week." And it's funny, we had a dynamic, like I said, with my dad, but he could be overly aggressive, man, but I could see the care in it. It was too tough to be like, I love you. You know what I mean? This is him saying, I love you, right? You know what I mean? And so it was like, but I remember that moment that I appreciated that. I needed that moment, right? You know what I mean? I mean, the world just threw me away, right? I literally got thrown away, and it's just like, I just had, my parents poked their head in and let me know that they, like they still there. And so they told me to call at least once a week. And I remember he was like, saying, at least call your mama. And I remember I can tell in retrospect, like, that was probably, he had a problem really connecting to his emotions. So he couldn't say that he wanted me to call him, you know what I mean? So that he'll know I'm okay. He got to put it on my mama. And that's what he did. So that was the beginning of that journey. And earlier on, I did a lot of whole time. I was doing a lot of fighting, and I was doing a lot of acting out, and I'm 16 in a penitentiary, and this is early 90s, and so they sent me to Clallam Bay. They used to call that gladiator school when they sent me there, and so it was a real. Let me just say the toxic masculinity was on 10. And so that was my experience. But what happened was some years later, like I'm doing a lot of banging my head against the wall. I'm acting out. I'm really in survival mode. You say I had 2 decades, right? 20 years, but I didn't. I had 60, which is a de facto life sentence. And I always say that. I was like, I did 24 years. I inevitably did 24 years, but 20 of it I did believing I was never going home. Right? And so those moments, every situation in there was life or death for me. Like every situation, like it was just like everything is measured up against the fact, like you got to spend the rest of your life in here. You know what I mean? And so I was in survival. But what happens was some years later, a couple came inside. A couple came in, and beautiful couple.
And how old were you at this time?
At this time, I'm in my 20s.
Okay. So you start with shame, and then the gladiator school, acting out, doing a lot of fighting, and now this couple comes in. So you're in your 20s, maybe about 10 years later or so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Almost exactly 10 years later. All right. Okay. And so they come in, and I remember, and they give me empathy. Like it was powerful for me, right? I always explain it like this. I always try to explain it like when you talk about if all you've seen were black crows, then you could make the assumption that all crows are black, right? You've seen 1,000 black crows in your life, and all of them have been black. Then it's easy to make the assumption that all crows are black, right? But if you just see one white crow, just one, you ain't got to see 2, 10, 20. It doesn't matter. If you just see one white crow, then now you know for certain all crows ain't black. And I use that as a euphemism for empathy, right? When you see empathy, you can't unsee it, right? See, when you're causing harm and you're bleeding out and you're in your trauma, you do so from this space of believing that the world is a scary and it's a horrible place. And when you believe that the world is a horrible, scary place, that kind of justifies you showing up in a way that doesn't that can cause harm and all. You know what I mean? Because you start to think, well, if the shoe was on the other foot, you would do me, or whatever the case, right? Like you start to lean on this way of thinking or these thought processes that make it so that that put you in a position where committing harm is possible, right? The hurt people, right?
So then this couple, they show you empathy for the first time, right? So you feel different. Like, tell us, like, what was that initial feeling like? And then how did it ripple through? Because it seems like this was actually a pretty pivotal moment during your youth in incarceration.
It absolutely was. And so when you get to experience empathy and somebody makes space for your humanity and gives you care, it's paradigm shifting, especially if you had this idea of how the world is because of your lived experience. You know what I mean? And it's different because it comes from, it's not like, I think, you have family who care about you, and you have folks and aunts and stuff like that. But I think as a kid, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, is they're supposed to act like that.
Yeah.
Right. They're supposed to. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you don't
Yeah,
give it,
totally.
it doesn't have the impact that it does that a stranger does.
Stranger, yes.
Right. Because your idea of the world is, of course, families stick together and you get married. But when it comes to some people you don't know, at first you're like, why do you care so much? Right. You're like, you know what I mean? You're looking for the angle.
Yeah.
Because this is how we've been socialized. And you're like, man, what's the catch? But it was powerful for me. And so the way that it felt, you feel like earlier in your life, you feel like nobody can see you, right? Everybody's idea of you or characterization of you doesn't fit with who you feel you are. It just feels like there's this big disconnect with how the world sees you and who you believe you are. So much so you start to internalize that till that becomes who you are. You believe the messaging, right? Because it's so consistent and it's coming from places where you respect their opinion, or they have positions of authority, and so it lands different. And so I think it was healing. Right. It was super healing for me.
So they come in around you're 25, 26, almost a decade in prison, and they give you empathy, and you're like you've never had that before. So you're trying to figure out what's the catch, what's the angle. And it sounds like there was none. So then what did that trigger? You talked about healing. So what were the phases, or what did you go through to start healing?
Absolutely. And so there was them coming up and continuing. It wasn't like just no one-time thing. It was just like they kept coming up. And
were they part of a program, or they just volunteers?
Part of a program.
Okay.
They were part of. They were volunteers, a part of, and it was a Christian program. But they didn't talk about the Bible with me though. They made space for me, right, and my voice, and me, and it was powerful for me. And so there was that. And then so part of that little program, they had a burn ritual, they call it, right, where they have this old coffee can and there's a fire in it, and they tell you to write down all the people you need to forgive, and then you write all those names down, and then you put them in the thing and you burn it, right? It's just a little process. It was a little powerful little ritual. But I remember they told me, they said, before I had the opportunity to put it inside the can, they were like, don't forget to put you on there. And that was pretty powerful for me, right? And I was just like,
did you initially have you?
No, absolutely not. Right. I mean, and the reason I say that is because it's like, we talk about how, especially when you cause harm in the way that I have, right? I think you always, what it would mean, and you don't deserve it, or you don't feel like you deserve it or whatever, but what would it mean to get forgiveness? Right. You know what I mean? Like what would that mean? Right. But it's crazy, because how could you expect anybody to forgive you? You don't forgive you. Right. And I never really come to terms with that, because that was so true for me. Like, I didn't though. Right. Like, and I don't know. And before that, I don't know if I could, you know what I'm saying? Like, because it's kind of like, how do you make space for the harm you caused? Right. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to brush past it, man. You don't want to pretend like it didn't happen. Right. You don't want to, like, it's kind of like you're cross the bear. Right. You know what I mean? That's like like the least you can do is suffer, right?
Yes.
Right. Like I'm just telling you the emotional, the internal process, right? And so it was powerful for me, for some folks who showed me genuine care and empathy and gave me permission to heal.
So now that they've given you permission, it sounds like it was moving to you and you internalized this. But at that time, it still felt like life in prison, but you serve another about 15 years or so, because you've been in about 10. So what happens from that time you start healing? Do you start taking gradual little steps and start changing from a behavioral perspective? Or is it like you kind of still the same and then something clicked? Or, share with the audience like how that ripples through the years going forward.
Absolutely. And I want to name too that healing isn't linear, right? Like, it's not like you hit certain guideposts in your life, like, okay, I got to phase 3. Now, if I got to do the work to get to phase 4, right? And so, remember, somebody once told me, like, it's more of a creative line, right? So that's what it was for me, right? But there was a lot that happened. And I just want to name too that I don't usually use change language. And I don't use change language because the implication of change means that maybe something was wrong with you and now you have to change to do something better, right? And so we always say that people don't change, they heal, right? And so what that looked like for me was you start to interrogate yourself internally. You start to have more honest conversations with yourself, right? About how you showed up, about who you are, about what you've experienced, right? That's what some of the internal process looks like. Outwardly, what it looked like was I started to gravitate toward more productive spaces and stuff. So I spent more time on the education floor, and I started to sign up for every class that was available, because that was one thing about having the time structure and the circumstances that I had. I mean, even the system believed it too. Like, they wouldn't let me into certain AA programs because to them, they felt like they were wasting resources, right? Because I wasn't going home. And so those things were prioritized for folks going home. And so even technically, the rule isn't that I can't get it but there was like, you get prioritized based on time. And so if all these folks who don't have that much time want to take it, but no, that's not even true, because a lot of them don't want to take it, right? Some of them don't want to take it, but they get forced to be put in there, right? And all this other stuff. But me, I'm fighting tooth and nail to try to get in those classes, and I wasn't able to. But I took whatever classes were available. And then what that looked like after that is I had to self-educate. And the good thing about the library, they have an interlibrary loan program, which means you can get books from any library through our institutional library. And so I was getting textbooks, right? I was getting like, what are folks, they won't let me in those classes. So I was like, well, what are they learning? Like, let me get those textbooks and stuff like that. And so I'm studying, and I started to structure my day to 8 hours a day to be productive, right? To study and work every day, right? It was just like real work for me. Like that was, and there was this quote that really resonated that I started to live my life by. And it's, success is a process, not a destination, right? And so it's the process in which you engage in that is proof positive of how successful you are. It's not about what you have. It's not about if I ever get free. It's not about if I ever have money. It's not about anything outside of myself. It's about this process. Because if I show up in this moment and I'm the best version of myself in this very moment, then that's all that matters. And then a collection of these moments, as they come together, then it's a day that I didn't showed up in the best version. Then it's a week, and then it's a year, and then when it's all said and done and you wake up and you look behind you, you realize you didn't have a good life.
I love that saying that, success is a process, not a destination, because at that time, you still had no idea you were going to get out. You probably thought you were going to be there forever. So share with the UnLost Cause community when you first find out that there might be a chance that you're going to get out. And then how does that change for you? Does success become a little bit more of a destination because you're like, hey, I might get out and be able to put this to work? Or, does nothing change and you're still keeping your head down and going forward and that very methodical standpoint?
That's a good question, because the truth is nothing changed, right? So the truth is I'm doing now exactly what I was doing when I was then, right? Like, I stuck to the script, and it's like, you condition yourself, like you understand, like it was a process. Like, think about it. I was carving out 8 hours a day. Like, it was like a regular work day. So I prepared myself, like, and I used to move as if I was getting out the next day. Like, I used to move like that. There were some folks that would come in and they would meet me and all that other stuff. And they would come back later like, wow, I just heard how much time you have. Like, I thought you getting out. Yeah, I thought you get out when I get out. And he'd get out like maybe in a couple months. And that came full circle too after I got released. Is I know folks was like, man, but you knew though. They're like, you knew because you were moving like that 10, 15 years ago. Like, you were moving like that. It was just, and so I think when you the focus is on us being the best version of ourselves in this moment, right? I think it's really about this moment. It's about being present, right? Because it doesn't matter how gifted you are or what you know. If you're not present in this moment, nobody will benefit from that. So nothing changed in that regard. I'm not going to lie though, emotionally, I went through, there was this process emotionally because I did just have my head down. I did.
Mm-hmm.
I just had my head down and I was studying, I was researching, I was learning, I was this perpetual learning a loop and preparation. But then when the bill came out, and for me, there wasn't this long buildup. Like I really didn't know until they were like, man, they got this new bill, the juvenile brain science, and they just passed the bill allowing for at first they talked about it and then it passed soon thereafter. And I was like, man, how do I feel about that? Like, it's crazy. Like I might have and that's all I ever wanted was an opportunity. I didn't need a guarantee, like a guarantee that you're going to release me. Like to me, I think the opportunity, like an opportunity for the hope that you can see me now.
I really want to talk about that opportunity versus guarantee. I think that's so well put, David. But one thing I think the community would love to get more clarification is you said you had a process or script, which was 8 hours a day, and you're doing that even now afterwards. So can you just outline like what is this 8 hour a day? Because it sounds like it could be beneficial to a lot of people, regardless of circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like when you want to do something daunting, right? Like you want to rebuild something daunting. Like if you want to, like, you know what? I'm going to build a pyramid in my backyard. That's what I'm going to do, right? Like something like I want to, it starts from a brick, right? It starts from a step. It starts from a step. And so we live in a society that sometimes, like if we don't show up perfectly, we shame ourselves. Like let's say you started working out and let's say you didn't go today. You know what I mean? You feel bad about that. Like, man, I'm not doing what I'm. And so I think what I realized is I looked at it from a perspective of investing, right? Investing in your future, investing in you. I looked at it like that. And so I just wanted to be able to invest every day, regardless of what that looks like. And so that 8 hours for me could look different. It could be me doing business plans. It could be me working on my habits, and it could be anything, but it's an investment. And so it's like, I feel like as long as I'm investing every day, that's just like somebody want to work out and he want to invest in himself physically. And that's just today, all they did is a couple push-ups. That's it. That's all they did. And I feel okay with that. All I had to offer today was that. But that's an investment. It got you a little bit closer to where you inevitably want to get. And so that's how I viewed it. And that allowed for me to rebuild a lot of different things that I might not have think were possible at the outset. I might have been looking at an Everest or looking at a pyramid and being like, I can never do that. That's crazy. Like what? That'll take forever. But when you just look at it from the perspective of one brick at a time, today I could do 2 bricks. I'm feeling real frisky. I might got 3-4 bricks today. Tomorrow it might be half a brick. But it's just about really staying that level of consistency to continue to build your future and to build yourself.
Got it. So the 8 hours can be different for different days, different people, but it was the consistency and the continual investment in oneself. And, it sounded like you gave yourself a lot of empathy too. Like, oh, today's not the best day. I'll just get half a brick. But tomorrow, I'm feeling better. I might get 2, 3, 4 bricks going on.
And that's the most important part, bro. And let me say that, David, that the most important part is to give yourself compassion, your self-empathy. That's the most important part because we live in a society that incentivizes and sometimes even demands that you show up perfectly. And when you don't give yourself empathy or compassion, what happens is that's what makes you stop showing up. You start feeling bad and you should start showing up. You're like, nah, I can't do it.
And then social media totally distorts it, right? People only put the best, like, oh, I'm throwing up all this weight at the gym, or I'm going for my 100th day in a row. But, there's a lot of people who don't. And then when we think everyone's doing it, but the reality is only a small fraction, and they edit only the ones that they might be 100 day at the gym, but they're drinking too much at home, or, there's something else going on. So I think social media definitely exacerbates that.
And I would say this. I think it was this. I seen this show talking about this influencer, Instagram influencer, something like that, right? And it was so pivot. It was so big because you go on her page and you got all these amazing pictures and stuff like all around the world and all this other stuff, right? But they showed the behind the scenes. And they show that this person be there all day taking pictures, sometimes 1,000 pictures trying to get the right picture, and then all the work to be able to polish it up and to edit it, right? And when you see the work that goes into this picture, you realize that you can't buy into the fantasy of what's presented. Like if it's amazing, it's amazing because somebody put a lot of work there. They put a lot of work in it. Like a story about one of my good friend. He's probably one of the most amazing speakers I know in my life. And he's really good. And to me, I thought he was good from the hip. Like every time I seen him, he was good. And then I got moved into the same unit with him when we were incarcerated. And I got to see his process. And he used to write out every speech, memorize it. And then he wouldn't end up saying what he wrote or memorized. He would just absorb the concepts of what he wanted to convey, which allowed for him to be so engaged and tailor it to the room. And that's why it seemed like he was so good from the hip. And so it lets me know, like, it's really about the work. You know what I mean? If you just see him speak and you might fool yourself into believing like, wow, he just showed up like this.
Yeah. So now that let's just fast forward to you're about to get released.
Mm-hmm.
What does the prison system do to get you ready to reacclimate? Because this is like 2.5 decades, right? And I'll give you a crude analogy. Like when I studied abroad in China in college, and they said that the cultural kind of change or adjustment is harder when you come back because you're like, what? This is like crazy. Or when you go to Peace Corps for a year and you come back, it's harder. So that's crude because you're in a much different place and for a much longer time. So how were you preparing to reenter, and then take us through the reentry process?
Absolutely. And let me say this, though. When I got on my healing journey, I was preparing to reenter then. That was my preparation to reenter. I got hyper focused on becoming the best version of myself. And I used to, like, folks would come back. I used to pour into a lot of other people. And I used to pepper them with questions about the streets, about what, you know what I mean? And learning about all these different things. And they would paint elaborate pictures for me about what the experience was for them. And that was me preparing, right? Trying to understand what it was like for them emotionally and mentally and when they got out there. And so as far as your question about what do they do to help prepare you, I think that's a difficult question to really ask. Because what did they do to prepare me? Like, for being honest, like, what did they do to prepare me? I remember when they were talking about, I had an opportunity to get released. We all had to take this Thinking for a Change class. And from their perspective, if you see them in a room talking, they're going to tell you that's them preparing us. They believe in this program that they think folks need to take and all this other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's addition by subtraction. Sometimes you just got to create a space for me to be able to prepare. The best things in the penitentiary are the volunteer programs. That's the best things in the penitentiary. Those are folks who are coming from the outside inside and bringing their programs on the inside. And because the thing is, it's not information that moves the needle. It's care and compassion. So when you have people who generally care, creating space for you, that's what creates the circumstances where you can grow, heal, and be successful upon your transition. They make it difficult for you to, like, you connect those bonds and those type of processes on the inside. They have policies where you can't interact with those folks when you get released. So this could be your chief support when you're in there. You're going to their class or their program every week and in preparation for when you get released. But when you get released, you can't have no contact with them.
Why is that? That sounds counterintuitive.
Right. But I think there has been some conversations about understanding how that needs to change. Right. But from their perspective, it comes from a security risk. Right.
Oh, okay.
They think about everything through a particular lens. And this lens nine times out of 10 gets in the way of folks really being able to come with solutions that really work. They don't understand the power of relationships. They don't understand that at the end of the day, when folks, you build a bond with somebody, in that you put yourself in a position where you can give them support when they get released. You know what I mean? They're going to trust what you have to say and what you have to listen to. And so to take that away can be pretty counterintuitive.
So then when you get released in your early 40s, I'm sure you were flooded with emotions, experiences, takeaways, but what would you share that maybe the top two kind of initial things that hit you when you got out?
I remember, like, during my 24 years, every time you get transported, you got to get on a chain bus. And that means you get stripped out. They put this bright orange jumpsuit on you with inmate on the back, right? And they put this bright or DOC on the back or whatever, and they give you waist chains and chains, and then they put you all on a bus. We call it the chain bus. They put you all on this bus that's blacked out. The windows are all the way blacked out except for like maybe 2 inches at the top of the window, right? And there's 2 COs in there. One got the gun, the other is driving, right? And they transport you to different institutions. And I remember every time they used to transport us, folks, I mean, it don't matter how tired you are, you want to look through the little window and look at the world, right? And I used to just be fascinated with the world, just watching people doing normal stuff. Like, they going to work, they doing, you know what I mean? And we used to dream, like just envision, like, wow, you know what I mean? Like, we're close to freedom, right? Even though we're not free. And so that used to be my experience every time I get transported. When I got released, it was a different process, right? They put us in a van. I didn't have no waist chains on. I didn't have, you know what I mean? And so that was like jarring for me. Like, I'm like, wow, like they just put us in this van, you know what I mean? And then they took me to a work release in Seattle. And so I remember, so like I said, my experience before about looking out the little 2 inches of window. So now I'm looking out the regular window of a car, of a van. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm like, wow, it's like, this is actually happening, right? And then when we finally, I think we were trying to have some conversations on the way there, but it's hard to be present in the conversation because I'm kind of overwhelmed with the like, I'm here. Like, I've been talking about getting here, and I'm here. And then when we got to the work release, which is the middle of Seattle, and they let us out to the van, all my property is in a box. And my whole life,
Literally
24 years, a box, my property box. And I'm holding that, and I'm just looking at the tall buildings. And it was that was the moment, right? Where I'm watching people walk down the street, and I'm watching folks just live their lives, oblivious, just worried about whatever they worried about in their moment, paying their bills and all this other stuff. And I'm in there with deep gratitude, because I'm like, I can't wait to be able to pay a bill. Because if you're paying a bill, if you got to pay a car note, that means you can pick what car you want to drive.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If you got to buy food, that means you can pick what food you want. You know what I mean? And I just spent 24 years of being fed poison that they call food, over processed food, and being given everything that I can have.
Let's take it from the perspective of your loved ones, right? Like you said that you ended up marrying that gal you were going to go to Puyallup to see, or your mom or your dad. Like, what was their reaction? And basically, they haven't seen you for a long period of time. So it's like, snap, and then you can see a lot of change going on. Or so what were, one, their reaction, and two, did they comment on how you've evolved and during this time away?
Yeah. So my wife now, so we were on and off during my incarceration, and quite understandably so, right? I didn't want to do life. I can't expect anybody else to want to do it either, right? And so that'd be tough for me to voluntarily be like, so I can understand, like, and we were both young too. So I think that that's important to point out is when I first, remember I told you I I went dark on her too. Right. And I remember when I was like, when I did, I told her to live her life, man, go ahead, do your thing. Like, like, man, and this was right after they took conjugals too, conjugal visits. So somebody in Column Bay did some wild stuff up there. And then they took those. And so the reality is it was just a whole lot of, and me dealing with the rest of my life and which might sound a little crazy is I think, she I felt at the time like she was my light though. Like she was represented everything innocent and good in me. You know what I mean? In my 16-year-old body, right? She represent that for me. And I was like, so that's why I was so difficult emotionally, because I was like giving up on her, man. I was giving up on me. You know what I mean? And because I felt like who I had to be when I walked up on, got off the chain, was I gave up on myself. So it's kind of like, and so that's why and that was difficult for me at the time emotionally, but I thought it was the best for her, and I thought it was like, and so it was what it was. But we got back together throughout my time too, and every time we did, it was like we never left, like real soulmates. It was real deep, like and then after a year or two or whatever, it would get hard again, and it would never be no blow up. There would never be. It was just we'd drift, and she would have to and I would understand though. I wouldn't kicking and screaming. I wouldn't be like, no, I wouldn't. I'd understand. Like I said, like I knew, and so it was on and off, and then it was off, right? I think she was living her life and she was doing her thing, and when I got released, I stayed at my well, at first I was in work release, and my dad would come get me for the social, which is time, be able to get you for a couple hours. And just so happens, my I had my first social on my birthday. Just so happens, it was my birthday and my 41st birthday. And so my dad took a picture of it, and then his wife at the time posted it on Facebook. And then my wife now seen it and was like, looks like he's out. Like, what is that? And then so she reached out, and then it was crazy. And then it was like, just so happens she just came out of her relationship, and we got back together, and it was, it felt magical, for a moment. It was just, we got married the next year, and it was, it's been a journey, So that was that. As far as like with my dad, I think it was, I'm so appreciative, you know what I mean? I think with my relationship with my dad, because it was so difficult early on. But during my time down, I was calling him every week, like every week, no matter what was going on. I mean, when him and my mom broke up, and all these changes happened in his life, like it was consistent, like it never missed a beat.
And how many minutes do you get on these weekly calls with your dad?
20.
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Okay, so every week you're calling him for 20 minutes.
Absolutely. And let's not forget though, like when I first got incarcerated, this was early 90s. And so this was $20 a call for a 20-minute call.
That was crazy.
Then. Absolutely. It's not that much now, but back then it was expensive, right? And so so every week, and now I at this point in my life, I look back and I'd be like, wow, like every week, for 24 years. And the beautiful thing is I got to get to know them. Like, how many folks have situations with their caregiver or their parent and they don't even know them? Like, you don't really have the context except for your father-son dynamic. Like, you don't really have no broader context about how he grew up or or what he experienced in his life and what his dreams and aspirations were. And it was just so, I got to really know him and get a real authentic relationship. And that was healing for our relationship. Right. And so when I got released, I stayed there. I stayed with him, and that was good. And then, but the problem is he started, he's older, and he started to have health issues. He was already having some health issues, but he wasn't telling me about it. Folks do that too. When you're incarcerated, they don't want to make it harder. So they don't tell you stuff, and and stuff like that. And I understand it, but I don't, but I do understand. And then so he started having health issues, and then he got multiple myeloma, and so and then that was a journey where we had to his relationship broke down, and then he was staying with us. And it was kind of like a full circle, right?
Yeah, that's what I
because
was
he'd been
about to
taking
say.
care of me. He'd been taking care of me, and then when I first got out, he was taking care of me. You know what I mean? I was staying with him and stuff like that, and now I'm taking care of him, and he's passed now. But I do appreciate being able to have those moments with him before he passed. And I really feel we did have the opportunity to heal a lot of what we needed to heal. And so, I'm still sad that he gone, but I'm grateful that I had those opportunities. And so, that is what that is. But as far as my mom, so my mom is Korean, right? I'm Korean and Black. And I remember in 2013, I think it was 2013, 2012, 2013, around there. I remember my mom, they had me out in Coyote Ridge. That's on the other side of the mountains. And my mom just woke up one day and came visit me. Drove all the way out there with her new husband. Drove all the way out there and came visit me, and she let me know, so she was trying to wait. She was always hoping that I get out. But I think at that period of time, it looked it unlikely. And so she went back to Korea. And I remember that was her last visit in the system. She came up there and put some money in my books. And then she just let me know she was leaving. But what was powerful though, and when I first got out though, she came back though. And, that was really good being able to hang out with my mom. I think, and we were able to have some real conversations as well. Me understanding how hard I made it, when I was young, and some of the decisions, and wanting to take accountability for that, because I think she always blamed herself. So it was, we were able to have some moments. And so and another, man, it was mixed bag when I first got out, but because remember what I told you about that amazing couple that came inside and showed me empathy and were in my life after that. I just need you to know that, when I got transferred to another institution, they didn't have the program over there, or they couldn't, and so they wouldn't, they were able to see me. So they left the program, they got on my visiting list. And it was an amazing dynamic. They really treated me like family. They used to send me pictures of vacations, and they used to keep me abreast of it was amazing. It was really powerful for me. So they were in my life the whole time. And I remember, coincidentally, his name is David too.
Yeah.
It is. There's something about David's.
Yes, there is.
We're our own little club, right? But he wrote an amazing letter for me when I went for the parole board. An amazing letter. It was 4 pages. It was long, and it was powerful. It was so powerful. I remember I was in front of the parole board, and usually they ask you, what are you going to do when you get released? What are you going to do? Work and all that other stuff. And what's funny is they didn't ask me. They just held up his letter we know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was good though. It was because he was so detailed, of what he was, he was, and at the time he wanted me to, I was going to intern, and he had an investment management firm, and I was going to intern with him there. But the problem was when I got to work release, his health issue declined. And that was really powerful for me too, because like he's going through it and he's worried about me. You know what I mean? Like he want to make sure I'm good and he want to make sure. And that was just, so I've just been blessed, like I've being able to actually understand what love and care feel like from some amazing folks who've been placed in my life. And so, sadly, he did pass to that same year, but man, so that was difficult. But I know I just so appreciate he had the opportunity to see me free though. Yeah, that was kind of important for me. But and his wife, she's still in my life, man. She's like my god mom, that's what I call it. Like,
Wow.
you know what I mean? Like she's
Wonderful.
She's super support. But and the last piece about relationships is while I was incarcerated, a good friend of mine, he got released and he had a daughter, and he made me the goddad. And that was so pivotal for me because I was young when I was incarcerated. I didn't have kids at the time. And and the mom was amazing too, where, they really, had me, made me feel like I was a part of her life though, in a real way. And I think that had a way of incentivizing me, like, you really want to be of value for whenever that person, this human being grows up and might need your help or need, you know what I mean? And so that was a different level of motivation and inspiration for me when I had the amazing opportunity for that, for her to be her goddad. And so now she's grown and it's crazy. Like, it's amazing where you've been able to see them start to grow and mature and put their lives together. And it's a village, we all want to make sure she's good. Right. And we want to play whatever part we need to play. And it's just, all that stuff play a part. And, when you feel like you have a community, the dynamics of folks you can depend on and folks that can depend on you, I think that that's the most powerful transformative thing, is that type of love and care and support.
That's amazing. And I know that you wouldn't be able to start the Black Rose Collective unless you had done all that healing and with those incredible people along in your healing journey. So I do want to touch upon like the Black Rose Collective, right? Can you share with the UnLost Cause community, one, what it is, and then two, what inspired you to start it?
Absolutely. What it is, it's a community organization, and it's a community organization that has the aspiration to do this work in our community-centered values. We want to center healing in all the work that we do, because understanding that we need to personally continue our healing journey and continue this difficult journey to heal, but also understanding that as a community, we need to heal. I think a lot of times folks look at healing like it's an individual thing that you have to individually do by yourself. And we think of it through a different lens, like community is collective. I mean, healing is collective. You know what I mean? We need to collectively heal. There's some healing that you got to do, but we believe that a lot of the trauma, the unhealed trauma, came from society and social interactions. It didn't come from like you individually. You know what I mean? I always say, like, you don't get an abandonment issue because something that's you just don't magically come up with that by yourself. You know what I mean? That come from you feeling abandoned by a caregiver or by folks in your life. And so there's this other understanding of that's what healing should look like too. You know what I mean? When you get seen and heard and you feel valued, that's healing. You know what I mean? How do you combat the fact that you have an abandonment issue? You know what I mean? You have a village that's there for you consistently, that catches you when you fall, that counters that narrative, that lets you know that you're going to be safe and that you're going to be good. I believe that is where we can really do our healing is collectively. And so when I think about, we talking about, so we do a lot of different work in supporting folks as they transition back to the community after incarceration, and folks and families impacted by gun violence. And we do a lot of different work, but it's this basic understanding of those are different ways this society has the impact that needs some care, compassion to be able to support the heal. You know what I mean? Our strategy is to be able to engage and be able to interject care, love, support, and resources, and as a means to be able to get folks sustainable, stable, so that we can create an environment where they can be brilliant, because we think folks are brilliant. You know what I mean? Not because we here or anybody else here. I think folks are brilliant before. I've always been brilliant. But there's something that I've learned is sometimes folks need an environment to be brilliant. You know what I mean? They need an environment created, or they need barriers taken down, or they need to be resourced so that they can just be brilliant. Something that they would have always done if they wouldn't have been impacted by a society that didn't see their humanity, or they weren't impacted by circumstances where they were under resourced. And so that's the concept, that it's understanding that and wanting to do so through an anti-oppression lens, do our work to dismantle these systems of oppression and that contribute to the circumstances that creates the symptoms that they focus on. They want us to focus on solving the symptoms and not the actual root causes to the problem. And so we aspire to do that. And so we know to do that, we have to continue our own personal healing journeys. And that is probably the best thing that anybody can do, because what you learn on your healing journey is the most valuable things that you have to offer the world.
So would it be fair to say you've come full circle in the fact that at 16, you were sentenced for life? You despite that, you did your own healing, especially when you had that big moment with that couple who came in about 10 years in. And then when you've come out, you did reentry, but then you started the Black Rose Collective as a nonprofit to help others who are in that same situation, plus the community in and of itself, to address the systemic issues versus just the symptoms. So you're trying to help a younger version of yourself or other people who may be in those similar shoes.
Right. But I would say this about the narrative, though. So, or about the story. So when I got released, I took this program on the inside, this Freedom Project program, this class. They had these classes. And then I volunteered when I got released. And then I got hired part-time, and then I got hired full-time. I helped them build out a reentry. And then I got hired to be the executive director at the Freedom Project. And then we grew that from 4 or 5 people to 26 people. So from a $200,000 budget to a $5 million budget, right? In a short period of time. And we grew that. And so in a part of those growing pains, you know, our board had a disconnect in values. Let me just say that. And so we left the Freedom Project, and then we started the Black Rose.
Is that the
So there was
core team?
there was a lot of people that got laid off.
Okay.
From the Freedom Project. You know what I mean? All the architects are the people who are doing the work in the community, man. The heart and soul of that organization left. And then we started the Black Rose Collective.
Okay.
So it came out of a space of understanding how there's these disconnects that happen, and wanting to heal personally. That was our goal, was for us to be able to heal from what we've heal from what's harmed us, and to grow, and to at the same time continue doing the work that we were building. And so from that space and energy, we created the Black Rose Collective. And so it is as a means, as you say. I think a lot of folks who do this work, especially credible messengers, are able to leverage their experience and are partially motivated by the fact that a lot of times we are looking in the mirror and having a deep understanding of what we needed in those times of those difficult times motivates us and informs us about what's needed. That's why I always say what's the best thing about having a credible messenger. It's not that they know what to say, but they do know what to say. But it's not just because they know what to say. It's what they don't have to say. When you have somebody that has a similar lived experience, we don't have to spend any of this conversation of you convincing me what your trauma was and the impact of your trauma. We know that because we've been through similar harms. We could just talk about, you know what I mean, what's needed. And I think a lot of times that is a barrier between when folks don't have the same lived experience is there's this fear or a belief that maybe you don't understand. You do what I'm saying, my experience. And so, there might be some judgment if I share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And David, the UnLost Cause community is about people who are 40 and over who decided to have that courage to pursue a dream, right? And you did exactly that despite a lot of obstacles. So what would you say to someone who's listening or watching right now who may be afraid to act or afraid to take that jump or may think that they don't even deserve a chance at this? What would you say to them?
What I would say is you were created perfect. You're amazing. You're brilliant already. Not because you got a degree, not because you got to learn something outside of yourself or receive something outside of yourself, but because of who you are. Right. And when we're able to connect to who we are and able to live that authentically, everything you want to happen will happen. Everything you want to come will come. And so I think in our society, we think we have to be something. And a lot of times we measure up ourselves against other people and other things. But listen, you can never be anybody else. You'll always be second rate. You're not them. And so, but you're you though. And like you can be an amazing you. And so when that voice in the back of your head, we all know that voice is, that voice is so disrespectful. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like if anybody else talked to you like that, you wouldn't go for it. But what I'm saying, that voice gets away with that. Right. And when that voice is popping off and it's in your ear and it's feeding you lies, you dig what I'm saying? That tells you that there's some things you need to heal. It's like a translator app. You're hearing it, but instead of listening to the words, just understand the place it's coming from. But like, that's something I need to heal. And what it's saying is going to give you clues on how to heal that. Like whatever it's actually saying, the words it uses, the way that it frames, listen to it, but don't listen to it like it's telling the truth. Listen to it like it's somebody screaming for help. You know what I mean? And so what I'm saying is, so when you hear the deserve conversation, as I was saying earlier in my journey, where I believe what I didn't deserve to be happy. I didn't deserve to heal. I didn't deserve anything in this. You know what I mean? When I was in my shame pie spiral, that was pointing to the things that I needed to look at and heal. And so that's the one piece, right? About what you deserve and what you don't deserve. You feel what I'm saying? But aside from that, I think that you already have everything you need to have to be brilliant. You already have that. And I want you to look at it. Don't just look at it about you. You know what I mean? Even though you will live a more fulfilled life when you're living your purpose, even though things will have a lot more meaning because there's a lot more substance. Yeah, that's true. But just understand what you're depriving the world. Just understand that you're here for a purpose in it. And if you're not living your purpose, man, just think about that the people that you love or like or the world around you won't benefit from your brilliance because maybe you have a reluctance to heal. So that's all I would say.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's super powerful when people have that self-doubt in the back of their mind. I think David's saying is like, you can listen to it, don't internalize it, but be curious as why, where's that coming from? And is there some healing that needs to happen or being aware and then addressing it so that you can leapfrog and then jump into what you actually do deserve. And you are special, you are unique, you're exactly where you need to be today to go to where you want to go tomorrow. So One of the questions I really love asking is that since we're in this together as part of the UnLost Cause community, what's an ask that you would have of the audience, David, and for be it how they can help or help themselves or, thinking about the world? I know that, you're very broadly thought and well-read. So what ask would you have for the community?
I think my ask is to stay connected to your humanity. That's my ask, right? My ask is that you stay connected to your humanity. You understand that you're a person, regardless of how flawed, regardless of that's all part of the human experience. And if you stay connected to that, then that will prevent you from getting the shame spirals because you feel like you're not showing up perfectly. That'll prevent you from not showing up from just not showing up because you don't feel you're doing the right thing. And you know what I mean? Or you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing because you're measuring yourself up against somebody else. And you know what I mean? Stay to your humanity. You had a real life. You have a real life and there's probably unhealed trauma that you haven't healed from. Right. And so my hope is that you give yourself grace and that curiosity David was talking about, holding that curiosity to really look at some of these things so that you can heal. And you know why I'm saying that and why I believe that's the best thing that you could do? Because when you do that, we benefit. When you connected to your humanity, then you will make space for other people's humanity. Because what you understand about yourself and what you learn about yourself, when you start to see you know what? I do that sometimes and I do that sometimes. And I know my heart and all this other stuff. And you'll be able to see other people's heart and you'll be able to see, stay connected to other people. You know what I mean? Even though they might be showing up differently or they might be at a different place in their healing journey. And the reason why I think that's so important, the reason why I think that's so pivotal is because I think that's what's missing in our society. I think we're so disconnected from our own humanity and it makes it impossible for us to connect to anybody else's. And when you create a society based on those building blocks, you get what we have today, where every system is impactful and harmful and disconnection is celebrated and normalized. And so my hope is that stay connected to your humanity. Know you're a beautiful person. You know what I mean? And if you can't say that out loud, I want you to reconstruct why that's true. Even if you're not so connected to it, why is that true that you're a beautiful person? Why is that true that you're brilliant? You know what I mean? And I promise you it's there and it's real. So that's would be my ask, David, is for folks to do that work, is stay connected to your humanity. And that's going to help you stay connected to others.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a 4-second moment of silence and everyone say to themselves, I'm a beautiful person. Thank you. And David, finally, if someone wants to support what you're doing or follow the Black Rose Collective on social media, how can they do that?
Well, we are on Facebook. Reach out to us online, theblackrosecollective.org. We would really appreciate your support. And this is collective work. It's going to take all of us, not just to heal, not just to organize, but to change and disrupt these systems that making it impossible for us to show up in our brilliance and for our communities to get resourced in the way that they need to, and for us to be able to create the world that we aspire to live in, a world with more care, more compassion, more love, more empathy. And so I know that everybody has an important part to play. And I hope part of that part you want to play is with us at the Black Rose Collective. And so please reach out and I appreciate the conversation. I really appreciate it, the space that you created. And I hope we can continue these conversations and continue to grow and learn from each other on this journey that we call healing and growing.
Well, thank you, David. Your journey is a living reminder that redemption is always possible and it's never too late. From a life sentence to building a life of service, David's story redefines what's possible when healing meets purpose. If this episode inspired you, please share it. You never know who might need that nudge to reclaim their own dream and turn a lost cause into an unlost cause. David, thank you for your resilience, your leadership, and your unshakable belief in what's possible. You embody the grit, determination, and fighting spirit of the UnLost Cause community. And just a reminder to everyone, you are beautiful. Thank you, David.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets, the UnLost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.